Hey everybody, welcome back to Anderton's TV. I've got a very special guest with us today, all the way from beautiful Canada. Sheldon Dingwall, one of the, I suppose, most pioneering bass makers of the last 20 years, more?
30.
30 years. Sheldon's popped over to the UK for a couple of weeks, so we thought we would get together, chat stuff, talk a little bit about the history of Dingwall basses. I think probably hone in on some of the, I think it's probably fair to say, some of the designs that people associate with Dingwall, you've pioneered yourself and introduced to the bass world. So we'll hone in on some of those, but welcome to Anderton's. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks so much for having me. What an honor.
No, it's all honors, all ours. So I've read a little bit about you. We've met once or twice in the past, and I know that, I guess like a lot of people who end up building guitars and amps for a living, your background was tinkering and making parts and bits and bobs and in a shop in Canada and stuff. So take us back and tell us, perhaps the origins of you getting into building, and what was that sort of pivotal moment where you just went, I'm going to do this for a living?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So I started having guitar design ideas when I was 12, and they were just brutally awful. They were terrible. But I got bitten by the bug. When I was 16, I remember sending a letter to Ibanez thinking that they could really use a 16-year-old designer with no experience. And of course they couldn't. There was one stroke of luck, and that was that the original electric guitar manufacturer in Canada, his name was Glenn McDougall, and Fury Guitar. He's since passed away, but Fury is still ongoing. He lived not too far from me, and so I was aware that you could build guitars in a small shop. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to be Fender or Gibson, and that first hurdle of, is this even possible? That was already taken care of for me. So it was always in my mind that this could be done. But my first foray was into manufacturing skateboards, which didn't go well. And then I was a professional skateboarder, which also didn't go well.
Wow.
Went well to a certain level, and then when I met like world-class skaters, it was like, oh yeah, that's not going to work. So then I toured. I did some recording. I had a recording, my own record company.
Okay.
And put out a single, and that got me into a band that toured Western Canada, and we did that for 3 years straight. And you could see the trajectory of that band going like that. And so
I was in a band like that.
yeah. Well, I learned lessons that I still use today. Hidden parts in your equipment, the jack, the truss rod. Places where it's easy to save money, we don't try to. We put the best quality jacks and truss rods we can, because in my experience when I was playing live, nothing ever breaks down during midweek where there's a music store.
Yeah.
It always breaks down at the worst possible time on a Friday night when the place is packed. And so we really put a lot of quality into that because of my own experiences. So I could see the trajectory of the band not going where I wanted it to, and while I was out on the road, I picked up a Gittler guitar. Remember those?
I've heard the name, but I can't picture one.
They look like a fish skeleton.
Okay.
It's just a bar down the center with frets attached to it.
Yes, I've seen those.
And I picked one up and I went, this is amazing. You can bend entire chords. And so that gave me the idea to start working on scallop neck guitars, and the original business concept was making replacement Stratocaster necks with scalloped fingerboards. That was the entire business plan, and
that because I remember when I met you before at one of the shows, feeling like, as a player, obviously you cut your teeth as a regular guitar player, and the early origins of Dingwall were guitars.
Yes.
So where was what happened to sort of shift the focus towards making basses then rather than guitars?
Survival.
Right. Just because there was a gap in the an opportunity better received or whatever, too much competition on the regular guitar side of things, or.
Yeah, I mean, the guitar necks led to people asking for guitar bodies, and then that led to them saying, well, could you assemble them for me? And so that required designing a body, buying wood, buying parts. And once we started building and selling complete guitars, we were also doing the parts business, and we had customers in Hong Kong and all over the States, and it was doing quite well. But every time we'd sell a guitar, we'd get a call from a bass player saying, hey, can you make me a 5-string bass?
Right.
And it was like, whoa, I don't know anything about 5-string basses. What are you looking for? And it was only 3 or 4 guys, but they all wanted the same thing. They wanted a good sounding B. And I asked them, you know, what other basses have you tried? And they named a list of basses, and I was like, well, those are all famous brands, and if they can't figure it out, then I really don't think I have anything for you. But of course, a seed was planted, and then I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night. How do we solve this problem?
That is interesting, because I've never thought about a 5-string bass as anything other than a 4-string bass with an extra string.
Yeah.
So you're clearly you're picking up from bass players, and your design mind is going, it's really not. A 5-string bass is not the same design, what's the right word? You know, the same hurdles to overcome with a 4-string. It's not about just putting an extra string.
It's completely different.
Which is I think, you know, that's a great sort of segue into even looking at maybe, because I mentioned when I saw this that I'd not seen that body shape before, and of course you said that was actually your first body shape, which I guess just shows that Andertons weren't selling Dingwall basses at the time. But, you know, maybe we can, you know, maybe you can just start to talk about how what's the process of you know, breaking down what are the challenges around, you know, making an instrument with that lower bass string on it, that lower B.
Yeah, and if we go back to when this was being developed back in the early 90s, there were no fan fret bridges, there were no fan fret pickups, and there were I can't remember even seeing another fan fret bass to try and get an idea off of. So I started with a case. I know I didn't want to get into the custom case business, so I went to a music store and I measured the inside dimensions of a case and went, okay, it's got to fit within these parameters.
Right.
And so even though, if you look at this B string, it's 37-inch scale, which is 3 inches longer than standard, but this bass is actually shorter than a typical 4-string Fender.
Because you've managed to get the bridge so far to the rear of the body.
Pushed it as far as possible, kept the headstock as tight as possible.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of a philosophy. And if you look at guitar builders from around the world, you'll see evidence of the area they grew up. French guitar builders, they have just such sophisticated curves because they're surrounded by sophisticated curves.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by wheat fields and straight lines, and so the design end of things has been really difficult for me. It didn't come naturally. I had to really work at it.
What are the origins of fan fret then? Because I mean, fan fret, I'm sure I've seen going back on acoustic instruments almost 100 years or something, or is there
longer than that? Yeah,
longer than that.
So, now fan frets are what you notice.
Yes.
But those are just what you have to do to get it to play in tune. What's actually going on is multi-scale.
Yes.
And so where this all started for me, and I didn't invent this, take no credit for that, where it started for me was pianos.
Right.
And we had pianos in the house, and I remember being this tall and the keyboard was this tall, and toddling up to it and hitting the low keys and going, I still remember hearing the low keys and going, wow, I really like that.
Of course, that's the grand piano is the original ultimate multi-scale instrument, isn't it?
And it came from the harp, which nobody knows the origins of, but there are drawings in Egypt going back as far as 3000 BC of a multi-scale harp. So this is ancient technology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the time, you would have been one of the first, if not the first person to have used multi-scale and fan fret on a bass guitar?
In modern times, it was Ralph Novak.
Right.
So I think the first instrument to use multi-scale was the Orfferion, and that was invented here in England, way back in the Renaissance period.
Okay.
And then it went away for quite a while. In the mid-1980s, Ralph Novak was experimenting with everybody was trying to get the best qualities of a Strat and the best qualities of a Les Paul. And they were putting humbuckers and Strats and single coils and Les Pauls, none of which really gets you there. Ralph Novak was the first guy to go, I think it's scale length. Because
what was the Novak? What brand was he making guitars?
Novaks.
Novaks. Never heard of them before.
Small one-guy shop, mostly repairs, but he did do custom building. He built Charlie Hunter's first guitars.
Okay.
He built guitars for quite a few famous musicians, and none of which I can remember right now. But and he's just a super creative guy, a genius, I would say. And he recognized that on a Les Paul, the treble strings are supple and fat sounding, but the bass strings, you got to really back off on them or they'll get pitchy on you. Strat, it's the reverse. You can hit the wound strings much harder. They're brighter, more focused sounding. Treble's a little bit thin and wheedly. And so he was going to just do a Les Paul scale length with parallel frets, cut down the middle, and then a Strat scale length. And he was like, yeah, but then I can't bend strings.
Right.
Well, I'll just connect the lines. And he didn't expect it would work. So he tried it, he played it that night, and he went, this is amazing. And he went down to the patent office soon after that.
So the fan fret was a patented original concept, was it? Or was it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, Ralph patented the fan fret design. There are lots of people that say there was prior artwork that because it was so old, the patent office wasn't aware of it, and they argue his patent. I don't argue it. I never would have thought of it, and if I would have, I don't think I would have had the confidence to show anybody. I would have been too worried about being laughed at.
I mean, presumably, you know, if I think about solutions to the sort of, you know, the flubby low strings on a Les Paul, or, you know, presumably I guess the string manufacturers would have gone, well, buy strings that are heavier at the low end or lighter at the top end or whatever like that.
Yeah.
But I guess you're right. You know, most guitar players have a thickness of string that they feel comfortable with, and when you're trying to sort of fit a thicker string just to get the tension, you lose that sense of comfort and familiarity on the string, don't you? So I guess the multi-scale is a much better solution to the problem than just compensating by using thicker or thinner strings.
I think so too. In addition to the string, like if you want to add tension, sure, you can add a heavier string. You're also adding mass. That mass is what's needed to slow that string down. When you add mass, it's harder for the harmonics to be reproduced. And so what happens is the harmonics start to drift from pitch, which, if it's a little bit, it makes the string sound fatter. If it's a lot, especially on a low string, it makes the pitch indistinguishable. So you could be, I've often heard of guys being one fret off and not knowing it, and nobody could tell because it was so indistinct.
Right.
With ours, not only can you hear the proper pitch, but you can actually hear the movement of the string.
So let's talk about, remind me again, what did you say the model of this original shape was?
So the original shape started as a Yamaha BB.
Right, okay.
Somebody brought me an old BB 300.
Yeah.
Which coincidentally, Lee Sklar had a hand in designing.
Cool.
Didn't know it at the time. He just asked if we could knock some of the ugly out of it. And it was super beat up. So I saw this bass made by Zeta, and it had a cut here and it had a cut here. It doesn't look anything like this model, but I did my best to just cut some weight out of here, slender up the horns a little bit, and put this cut here. And then I cut the headstock off and turned it into a 2-in-2 headstock.
What did you call, what is the name of this shape again?
This is the Voodoo shape.
Voodoo, that's right. So, I mean, I kind of find that sort of that journey down the fan fret sort of route kind of fascinating. I sometimes feel like fan fret is kind of more accepted, if that's the right word, in the bass world than it is in the guitar world. It's obviously available in the guitar world. Do you think that there's an element of saying that it suits an instrument where single notes are played more than maybe an instrument that's chordal? Or do you think it's just maybe bass players are more open-minded to change than guitar players?
Bass players are more open to change.
Yeah.
You'll see fan frets in 7 and 8 string guitars.
Yeah.
And 7 and 8 string players have a different mentality than 6 string players.
Yeah.
But as far as what it's suited for, we designed the bass to be a generalist instrument, but I talked about where I grew up. It's the prairies, and the mentality is I got to be able to pay for this, right? It's function first.
Yeah.
And so these frets are designed to be as transparent as possible. You don't even have to look, and your fingers will find the way. And then these frets, you're going to spend a little bit more time woodshedding, especially if you're going to be doing chords. Mm-hmm. But one of the beauties of having that extended scale and having the harmonics so in line and in tune is that now when you play chords, you can distinguish the individual notes. Like if you think of a concert grand piano, with all the reverberation in a concert hall, even if you're in the back seat, you can still hear it with complex chords. You can still hear every individual note. And so it's a beautiful instrument for chording.
Let's talk about some of the other things that, I know there are other brands that use the sort of individual bridge pieces here, but is this all proprietary stuff for you as well?
Yeah, we make that in-house.
Yeah, so, tell me about that. When did you start realizing that, individual saddles as opposed to one-piece bridges was the way forward? And again, tell me about the electronics and what it is that... I'm sort of fascinated. I think that, you are one of those manufacturers that doesn't just, visualize a shape and then just put third-party hardware on it and go, here it is. You're right into the detail of trying to get everything how you want it. So, what are these even cast from? It's really an interesting...
Those are machined from solid aluminum.
Right.
And then the screw heads are stainless steel.
That's a really clever design. You've gone for... Some people will obviously just cast a standard piece of steel or whatever to make the saddle. Some people will use a roller. But you've got two sort of dome-headed screws, but positioned really close together to get the groove.
They create a V.
Yeah.
And that came partially from the repair side of things, because there'd be these cheap cast saddles that would start to corrode, and then they'd get sharp, and then they'd break strings. And I saw it over and over again, and I thought, you know what? I never want to do that. And so the original concept was to use stainless steel screws, because if it ever got worn or corroded, well, it's not going to corrode, but if it got worn to the point where it's breaking strings, it's a 50-cent part. I
was going to say, because I'm always, you can burn through tens of thousands of dollars if you just go, I just need to make this unique part. I need to tool up to make this one part. So every time you can go, actually, what? This part already exists for use in something else.
Yes.
And I can buy it for, cents. Then, that saving is passed on to the end user, but with no compromise over its performance, So I always find it fascinating when manufacturers kind of go, well, yes, I found this relatively affordable part that's a really effective solution to the way that, adjusting the string height and avoiding friction and, getting the right tone and sustain. But the individual saddles, I'm looking at this, they're mounted onto a block that's underneath?
They're mounted onto a block, and then instead of screwing it to the body, which again from the repair business, every bass that came in for repair, at least one bridge screw was stripped, and so we clamp it. So these wide-headed bolts are screwed into the block, and they clamp the body.
Yeah,
and you get the most intimate coupling possible.
Yeah, because I remember looking at some of the original Leo Fender designs when he first started G&L, and some really interesting thoughts going in behind how do you get as much transference from the string into the body of the guitar. And obviously, you know, something like a Strat trem system doesn't really do that terribly effectively, but some of the Telecaster style bridges that he was doing post Fender in the sort of G&L era, I mean, massively over complex to design and engineer, but on paper you could see what he was trying to do, you know, with getting the break angle of the string to push the bridge into the body of the guitar and all that kind of stuff. But I'm always it always makes me laugh that there's so much debate on the internet around what difference does the body make, and and actually, can you just string anything onto anything and it'll all sound the same as long as your pickups are the same? And I sort of sit there going, you're missing the complex acoustic interaction of just everything. And it might be just trying to do this tiny bit, but it's still there, right? You know?
That's what wins F1 races. That
Great
tiny
analogy.
little bit.
Yeah.
And to me, the question would affect the tone. It's too narrow in focus. It's not just the tone that makes an instrument, it's the response. And we've all had experience playing an instrument where it just feels like it's fighting you, and you hit a note and it disappears. And we've all had experience where the instrument was lively and it just felt effortless to play. And when you think about, okay, the first experience, are you going to be at your best? Is it going to be your best performance? Probably not. But if the instrument is playing with you, it's a team between you and the instrument, you're probably going to play either at your best or even better than you've played before, and that's what people will hear. Whether they hear the difference between that fingerboard and that fingerboard is debatable, but they will hear a difference in your performance.
Yeah. So let's just, I think what I'd like to do, we'll talk about electronics, and then we'll maybe go through the evolution of some of the different shapes and models of on the Dingwall range. And then if there is, if there's anything you want to tell us about exciting news that's, in the past, or again, how maybe working with different artists has influenced you to go in directions you didn't think you would go. But yeah, so you make your own pickups.
Yes.
Again, I guess the question there is, what was the need? What was it that you couldn't find in a third party alternative?
The original bassist started out with Bartolini pickups, and Bill and Pat Bartolini, oh man, they were like family.
Right.
But so was Glenn McDougall from Fury Guitars. He was like family too. And back in the late 90s, Bartolini was everywhere on every custom bass.
Yeah.
And for good reason, because they sounded great. But they were hard to get.
Right.
And we had 20 basses with holes in the front of them waiting on pickups, and I was going to go broke. And Glenn had always encouraged me, Sheldon, you got to let me help you design pickups.
Right.
So one day I just said, all right, Glenn, let's do it. And so every pickup of this design, it's a reverse P, neodymium magnets in most of them. These ones are FDVs, so they have a Alnico magnet. But all of the pickups with that structure are called FDs for Fury Dingwall, and they all stemmed from Glenn. So Glenn wound. We built the pickup structures and we sent them to Glenn to wind, and oh man, 20, 30 prototypes. And it's funny, I've noticed something interesting when you're testing tone. You may immediately like it, and that's a good sign, but give it a couple of days. Right. And that happened with all our pickups. That's perfect, great, perfect. And 2 days later, Glenn, it's a little bright. Could you throw some more turns on it? And then there's times when they don't sound good at all, and then you're stuck with going, well, do I not like this tone because it's bad, or do I not like it because I'm not used to it yet? And so that takes a little while to get used to.
Yeah.
So Glenn wound pickups for a few years, and along the way I was going, you know what, we need to be self-sufficient here. And pickup winders are available. Well, they're not. There's no such thing as a pickup winder, but there are machines available that you convert to pickup winding. And I didn't have the money, so I dug through my closet. And this is what I tell people anytime I don't have the money to buy one of your basses, Sheldon. Dig through your closet, see what's there that you're not using. and I got all my old 70s skateboard gear. I had a helmet that sold for $400 to a guy in Germany, and I was able to raise the exact amount of money to be able to buy a pickup winder. And so we started winding our own, and we were making our own pickup shells and trying to look as professional as possible, and it just became an evolutionary process to where we are now.
That's cool. I never forget, Paul Reed Smith always had a good comeback for anyone that said, I can't afford a Paul Reed Smith guitar. He said, no such thing as can't afford it, you just don't want it enough.
Exactly.
That was all it was. Let's talk about the evolution from the voodoo into some of the other shapes, and perhaps how, what were the influences? Were there artists that influenced you, or feedback from customers? So where are we going sort of next from here? Are we going to the combustion, or I know this is one of the more affordable bases, isn't it, from memory?
Yes, and so the voodoo evolved into two models. One was ash, and it had highlighted grain and kind of a zebra effect, so that became the voodoo zebra. And then one was all fancy tops with a matching fancy back and an oil finish, and that became the voodoo prima. And it became a mouthful. And so we eventually dropped the voodoo name, especially after the Stones came out with Voodoo Lounge. It was like everything was voodoo, 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 and we went, okay, we're too mainstream now. They became the Z series and the Prima.
Right.
And then Bass Player Magazine in '96 did a review of our Prima, and they gave it the most glowing review I've ever seen. And I don't know why, but that was the last one we made of that style, and then I completely changed the entire style of the body.
And is that where this style of body comes in, or there's another one just behind you, I think there, isn't there?
Yeah, unfortunately I'm talking about designs we don't have here, but
that's all right.
So that carried forward and the Afterburner was sort of the first entry-level bass that we worked on, and the shape was very similar to the Combustion.
Yep.
And it developed into 3 separate models. By 2008 or 9, and we'd been looking for manufacturing help from people like Godin, Cort. Everybody said no. We went through 15 different manufacturers trying to find somebody who would take on the multi-scale system, and everybody was like, no, it's too difficult. And they're right. It's crazy difficult. But we finally found a partner that we could work with who everyone, at least on the rep side, were bass players, and they knew more about my basses than I did. They knew about, I met one of the reps at NAMM, and he was telling me information on our basses that I'd only released the day before. So I went, okay, these guys are into it. And we partnered with them, one of the best factories in China. And that became the Combustion. The Combustion developed into the NG model.
Right. So that's the sequence. I was sort of looking at this body shape, sort of thinking you can see some of the origins, and you've obviously kept some of the sort of signature little scoop out the bottom and where the socket goes, but there's a little bit of a sort of a simplification or sort of smoothing up of some of the lines around here, isn't there? And maybe a slightly more accentuation of the horns and stuff. But
yeah.
So was that was just driven by your side, or is this feedback from artists sort of, and users sort of driving that?
Well, I mean, one of the complaints, every builder that makes instruments in North America or Europe, UK, they all face the same problem. Their customers are musicians, and it's difficult to make a living in the arts. Mm-hmm. And so musicians typically, they don't have the cash flow to buy a $5,000 bass. Some of them do, but most of the customers for people like us would be professionals who play music on the side. And so to really get to the musician that's out there playing in the clubs and the churches and the concerts, you need something that's quite a bit lower priced. And so that's where we're headed with this. A professional instrument that can tour the world, but it's great value for the money. So
yeah, I mean, like you say, the sort of the working musician. So where I mean, I look at this and I just sort of, you were one of the pioneers or the first people, I think, to make a leap of faith and make a very professionally spec'd instrument in China that was going to cost probably, although it was going to cost a lot less than the Canadian made ones, it was still going to cost probably 3 or 4 times what the general public probably perceived the Chinese instrument should cost.
Yeah.
So what was the, and I'm trying to remember whether, I think Andertons were on board with Dingwall by then, and I think even we were sitting there going, wow, are we going to get $1,500, $2,000 for a Chinese-made instrument? But I think it's been quite groundbreaking, and you've sort of played a fair part in changing perceptions about what can be achieved in Chinese manufacturing if you pick the right partner and control the spec and all that kind of stuff. So what was your, again, what's been your sort of experience of the Combustion series, and where have you tried to use parts from the Canadian stuff versus parts that you've had to try and design specifically to sort of hit a more affordable price?
Yeah, I mean, we're still working at it, and you're right. I've heard it said before that this, the NG especially, was the first Chinese-made instrument that was a destination instrument for a player. It wasn't just a stepping stone to one of the higher end models. It was like, no, I'm good. I'll tour with this. And Adam Nolly Getgood toured with his original Combustions worldwide, and they survived and they served him well. And so one of the reasons they're so expensive, and I understand the negative feedback, especially in the early days of like, what are you guys thinking? It's a Chinese-made instrument. Why is it so expensive? The reason it's so expensive is that they can't use any of the tooling, any of the economies of scales that they've developed, because they have to stop and cut 1 fret slot at a time. Normally, on a normal parallel fret neck, they're all cut at the same time. 24 frets, zing, done. This is like one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. They are a really challenging instrument to build.
Yeah.
And there is, underneath the paint, it's a 2-piece body. It's not we specify high-end quality. If you look at the back of the neck and you look at that maple, it's as good a maple as you'd find on a $10,000 base.
Yeah.
Because that's not something that we want to save money on it. Look how long that neck is. It has to be good, otherwise it's going to be a problem. Yeah. And so, everything on it is a high-quality part. We've saved money on the labor because the cost of doing business over there is a lot less than it is where we're from. But in addition to that, there's only so much quality you can expect. And so we have every base shipped back to our facility. And then we have an entire team of guys who take the necks off, they level the frets, they crown and polish the frets, they do the nut. They go through all the hardware, they go through all the electronics. Minimum of 2 hours per base is done on, it's not just a setup, it's like we're taking the best of China and getting it as close to the best of Canada as possible.
Yeah, and I've had some experience as well of dealing with different factories out there, and it surprised me. I think China has an unfortunate I suppose, preconception from the end user that the only reason to go to China is to make the cheapest bass or the cheapest product that you possibly can. And I've worked with some factories in China that have, 100-year histories as instrument makers, acoustic instrument makers, and employ amazing craftsmen. Or on the flip side, have had, millions and millions of dollars of investment on the CNC machinery and stuff. So yes, you still can go to China and say, can you make me a bass for $50, please? Or you can go to China and say, can you make me a bass for $2,000, please? It's like, and if you find the right partner, I don't think it's fair to assume that because it's Chinese, it must be at the low end of the quality spectrum.
Yeah, they can make the best in the world. iPhone would be a good example of that. And Canadians can make the worst in the world. I won't mention any names there. But
I would say on that point, though, I do think that it's very common for manufacturers with a Western heritage, be it Canadian, North American, British, whatever, European, to go, let's try and make an affordable, like a low-cost instrument from our home territory.
Yeah.
And you just end up going, it's still fairly expensive and it's just bad. It's just, you've tried to pump something out with, cutting corners and all kinds of stuff. So I would agree that, buying a really well-made Far Eastern instrument is a better way to go than trying to skimp and just make the cheapest instrument that you can out of a country which is, has just a high base cost of making stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the president of a corporation. I have financial obligations to my company and to my employees. But what really drives me in terms of design is that hanging on my wall is a violin from the 1700s.
Yeah. And
it's been passed down from generation to generation to generation into my hands, and it's still playable. And so nobody knows the life expectancy of an electric guitar or an electric bass guitar, but I fully expect that 300 years from now, that bass will still be making music. It'll still be contributing to the positive side of the world. And
can I just say, if in 300 years' time you have serial number 09919 and you're watching some ancient YouTube video of two guys that you've never heard of before, this was it. Amazing. Be like some
good for you
25th century version of the Antiques Roadshow. Here it is. I do want to talk about the shape of the green one there, which I think is an awesome shape, and you can definitely, as a visual signature, you can see where perhaps some of the inspiration has come from for the D-Rock. But I mean, and maybe again, just tell me about the artist, because you are very well respected as a bass designer, as an instrument designer, and I know artists come to you with ideas, and you sort of are able to realize those ideas for the artists. But that it's not just the shape. I mean, that's quite a different bridge again, isn't it? And what was the thinking behind trying to do the D-Rock?
I wish I could remember the name of the person who first presented the idea, but they suggested a model, which I won't mention, from a company, which I won't mention.
And that might begin with G, but who knows?
Which is a highly respected, and I have the utmost respect for them. And it's interesting with guitar design. It's the same with guitar design as it is with any artistic process, including music. There are only so many shapes. There are only so many notes. There's going to be some gray areas where that's kind of similar to something else I've seen or heard. So it's not uncommon. But and that shape that I'm talking about kind of works with the back end of the body, kind of works with the bridge, and so
yes, it does.
It was 8 years, 8 years of drawing, probably well over 100 headstocks, trying to make it all work. Not solid, not every day, but take it as far as I could, run out of ideas, go, I'm dumb. And then a few months later, find some inspiration. I'm not so dumb, and try it again. No, I'm still dumb. And so just over and over in 8 years. Brought it out, and it was at the London Bass Guitar Show. We presented the first one, and I was only showing a prototype. I was expecting it would be a production model. But it was so popular at the show that we made a Canadian version of it, and we were fine for quite a few years. And we used the same lawyer that tends to get in squabbles with this particular company, and he was like, "Sheldon, don't worry about it. And then one day we won Best in Show with the 5-string version at NAMM, and a couple of days later, it became apparent we needed to worry about it.
Oh man!
And I was about to go on a surfing lesson, and it spoiled my surfing lesson. I couldn't enjoy my surfing lesson. But on the plane ride home, after feeling like, this sucks, this is terrible, I thought, well, wait a minute. Why don't we put this curve? Because that's on almost every one of our basses.
Yeah.
People like that. It's distinctive. If I put that curve there, that'd make it a little bit different. And if I tweak the horn, that would make it a little different. And so that's how the D-Rock evolved. But the concept for the curves, if you look at the body, it's got this nice parallel line. I try and do that on all the bodies, and a ton of contouring on the back.
Yeah.
The idea was like, what would happen if the guys from Lamborghini were to, try and design a bass guitar? And I don't claim to be as skilled as those guys are. They're extremely gifted, but it's my interpretation of what I thought their interpretation would be of a classic design.
I think it's cool. And actually, I think you're not the only manufacturer that's fallen foul to an infringement sort of cease and desist. But sometimes I think to yourself, I understand why they do it and why they want to try and retain their IP. And sometimes I think it forces, it's good things happen because you go, I probably could tweak this, and then I come up with something that is original. It's inspired by, but original.
Yes.
And then it's the best outcome for everybody.
I think so too, 100%.
I mean, it's cool. I love that color. So this is right. So this is again one of the Far Eastern ones, and even things like getting that depth of metallic flake in the finish is not something you can go to every factory out there and just say, can you get this right, please? And all the contouring, that's crazy level. Is that all super high end CNC, or have you got people doing that by hand? It's also very consistent.
Yes. it's CNC'd. It takes forever, and then the sanding is difficult on top of that. I really respect the factory workers that have pulled this off.
Yeah,
you're right. The finish is amazing. We helped develop that finish, and so I have experience spraying 2 metal flake bodies. I never want to do it again. It's mind-numbingly terrible. But I learned my lesson from that, and I came up with a way of doing this so that it eliminates a lot of the problems. But that particular color of aquamarine, man, it was, I could see it in my mind's eye, and we were going drop by drop. Put a little blue in, spray a sample. How does it look? Run out, 3rd floor, run all the way down, out to the outside to hold it in the sunlight. Too much blue. Run it back up, add a drop of yellow, spray it again, run it back out. Probably 15 times up and down the stairs, and it was literally drop by drop to get it that color. And
that's fantastic.
I just love that color.
So come on, tell me about, let's have some artist anecdotes. I mean, it's all very interesting talking about, you know, sort of engineering and design and CNC machines and everything, but surely the fun is working with the artists and trying to satisfy their creative needs. So, and you've been fortunate to work with some of the biggest names in the world of bass, but tell us some of your favorite stories. And I think even though we're going to, we're in April at the moment, and I think we're going to sit on this video for a month or two before releasing it, because I know there's 1 or 2 things Sheldon wants to talk about that we can't talk about until June, but anyway, that's why. So come on, tell us, artist-wise, who you know, you've obviously made some great friends and must have some good stories.
You know, the first big name artist, actually the very first endorser is a guy named Hank Insel. He's based out of Beijing right now and has been for years. He's been playing our basses for 30 or more than 25 years. I'd have to do the math, and I can't do that because I'm terrible at math. Hank was the first. He's still with us. The first big name artist was Lee Sklar.
Here's a song we did in 1990 with Phil Collins on his But Serious album, and this is Another Day in Paradise. And this is from our live performance of it here. So this is in, I believe, in Germany where we did this. It's Brad Cole developing tension on the keyboards, and then Daryl Sturmer will come in with his guitar.
And I bumped into him at NAMM. I was rushing off to the washroom, and I ran around the corner and almost like smacked into him. And oh, you're Lee Sklar. Hey, have you ever heard of fanfrets? No. Would you like to try them? And I can't remember the gist of the conversation, but if you've ever seen Lee at NAMM, he's such a distinctive character that it's literally walk 2 feet, somebody stops.
Yeah.
Lee, can I get a picture? 2 more feet. Lee, I got a story. 2 more feet. You know,
he's not an inconspicuous looking chap, is he really? So
yeah, and he never tries basses out because he's happy with the gear he has. But there was just something about we just kind of gelled right at the beginning. He thought, oh, okay, I'll give this guy a try, and that was our first NAMM show. So he tried the bass. He liked it. He said, yeah, well, let's keep in touch. And the genius that I was at my first NAMM show, I didn't get his contact info. And it took me a year to track him down.
Right.
So I finally tracked him down, sent him a bass. It arrived on a Friday, and he said, yep, bass is here, feels good, take it. I'm going to take it to work tomorrow. And work for Lee Sklar could be anybody. And in this particular case, it was Brian Wilson. So he recorded one of Brian Wilson's albums with our bass. And Monday he called and he said, it's amazing, it's fantastic, I'll do anything you want. You want me to endorse? I'll be an endorser. And he has been ever since, and it's been over half of his career now.
Amazing.
Those dots came from Lee Sklar. The fret size came from Lee Sklar.
They're skinny frets, aren't they?
Yeah, they're more like a vintage fret.
Right.
We call them banjo frets because those are the frets you'd spec on a banjo, but they'd also be on an acoustic guitar or on a 60s Fender. And at the time, I came from sort of hair metal, 80s, frets this big. And if frets are this big on a guitar, well, they need to be this big on a bass because a bass is bigger. And so I put the most giant frets possible. Lee got the bass, and he said, oh yeah, and there's just one thing though. I forgot to tell you that I prefer Mando frets.
Right.
And I was like, oh, this does not compute. Like, Mando frets. Oh, well, you're Lee Sklar. I'll make you another bass. So I did. And I had one of those eureka moments the first time I tried them. The bass just felt like it played itself. It was so much easier to play. The neck felt thinner, same shape, same dimensions, but it felt half the thickness because of these thin little frets. And then the sound of when you glissando up and down the neck, instead of clack, 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 it sounds just all you hear is pitch, 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 pitch. It's amazing. It was an incredible difference. Mando frets for production bass would be really challenging. We can do it at the Canadian shop. I don't think I would ask a factory to go frets that small. So we compromise with banjo frets.
So yeah, when you say Mando frets, you mean as in mandolin?
Yeah.
And they're just...
Yeah, put on your readers to see them.
Wow. See, I love stories like that, you know, of you would never have considered that from an engineering perspective, unless an artist had gone, that's what I want, and you just go, okay. And then you find out crazy stuff, don't you? It's like, wow, yeah, I get it, it works.
And it was just a happy accident for him too. He was having his bass refretted in LA, and he saw this fret wire in the wall, and he said, hey, can you put some of that on? And the luthier was John Carruthers, who used to be a columnist for Guitar Player magazine.
Right.
A fellow Canadian. And John said, no, Lee, you don't want those. So those are for mandolins. And he says, yeah, I do. Give them a try. If they don't work out, we'll pull them out and try something else. And that was on his autograph guitar, that 4-string with no finish.
Right.
And everybody's chiseled their signature into it. That bass will be worth a fortune at some point. But he's been using Mando frets ever since.
Tell us about some of the other artists. I mean, I've met Nolly a couple of times. I think my impression of Nolly was when you hear about an artist from a band like Periphery, you have a perception of what they're going to be like, some mad metal crazy, and he's just like not that guy. He's quite serious and
oh, yeah.
He's I know we talked about doing some videos with Nolly here, and I could see Nolly going, I think you guys are a bit kind of, I don't think you're really serious enough for the kind of content that I want to shoot. So, he must have had some fairly demanding and interesting perspectives on what to do with his bass design.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Nolly was he was originally in school to be a physicist.
Right, that makes sense.
And he thought, you know what? I can be a physicist at any age, but I can only be a rock star when I'm young. And so he transferred to the guitar program. And he never intended to play bass, but that was the only role that Periphery had. And
amazing.
So when he joined them, I believe the previous bass player, I'd have to double check this, I believe he had one of our basses. And so they just suggested, this works for what we're doing, you should use this one. And then he got it right away. And I remember meeting Nolly at the London Bass Guitar Show, and he looked like a kid. He looked like he was still in high school. But he was just one of those guys, you know, you see somebody and you just go, hey, I like that guy. I hadn't even talked to him, but I could see him in the distance, and he'd traveled from Bath to the show. He wanted to meet me and talk about being an artist. And at that point, I'd never heard of Periphery, I'd never heard of him, but I liked him so much and I liked his style that I thought, yeah, we'll do an artist deal with you. And then he wanted crazy tuning, and it's like, oh man, all right, well I wasn't expecting that, so we did the crazy tuning for him. And then we started hearing our name in sort of the metal arena. We'd been building basses for 25 years, but really most people have only heard of us in the last 5 years, and it's because of Nolly and what that opened up. And you know, there seems to be this relationship between the progression of music and instruments, and a new instrument gets developed, which opens up the abilities of artists to create new music.
Yes.
Until they get to sort of everything that can be done with that guitar, and then it starts to go back either to retro,
yeah,
or else another instrument comes along that allows more creative freedom.
I think Periphery, all the members of Periphery are a great example of pushing the boundaries of what the instruments will do, and also being very open with their fan base about much more detail behind, you know, how songs are written, production techniques, products used to get certain sounds. So they've, you know, I know Misha and Nolly and the rest of the band have, you know, have all, I think, played quite a significant role in moving manufacturers forward with ideas and musicians forward with techniques, and even how they write, you know, because none of them are the traditional, none of them come from a background of playing the instrument that they play in the band, you know, so it's exactly. Like, it's a crazy melting pot of ideas there. Anyway, look, so I know we want to talk about John Taylor, and again, they don't come more iconic a bass player, I guess, than John. But who else? You know, who else have you had the pleasure of working with and developed relationships with?
Well, let's pause for a minute on John. And John is one of those guys. He's an iconic bass player, but I still feel like he's a bit of an underdog. And I still think there are so many people that younger people that need to listen to what John's done and his body of work, because, man, can you think of another band where the keyboards and the bass work so well together and are so prominent? It's a bass-driven band as opposed to a guitar-driven band. And I'm a guitar player. That hurts me to say that.
Well, we talked quite a lot over the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm talking about, you know, the guys, myself and Pete and the guys in the video team, just saying the 80s had a lot of pop bands, you know, bands that almost proper musicians would look down their nose at because they were just in the pop arena, that actually, looking back now, were really progressive rock bands, you know, that you know, there's no way that Duran Duran could come along now and they would never be a pop band nowadays. They'd be pigeonholed into some sort of progressive niche pigeonhole, you know, and I think people underestimate the level of ability that there was on those musicians. We were talking about a guy called Nick Kershaw.
Yeah.
You know, like, you listen back to the songs that were pop songs, top 10 charting pop songs that teeny boppers were buying back in the day. I was in my teens in the 80s. My first ever single was Nick Kershaw's The Riddle, and it was a pop record. And you listen back to it now and you go, oh my God, it's infinitely more complex than what we now talk about as pop music. And I think most of those big bands, I almost even want to go, I bet if you went back and deconstructed, Tears for Fears, Level 42, sure, all those kind of bands, there's way more, what's the right word? Musicianship, maybe, or...
And a sense of adventure.
Yes. I don't want to make it sound like a downer on sort of, modern pop music, but you're right. It was more out there. They weren't necessarily treading the sort of the set pop path that maybe you could say nowadays is a bit more familiar. Not always, but
yeah. And it was back in an age when Western society was having a hard time, and so I think the collective consciousness was looking to the future as the future is going to be better because right now sucks. And for the longest,
how little did they know it got so much worse.
Exactly. Go back. Yes. Whereas from the mid '90s, popular culture has looked backwards and ripped jeans and retro cars and retro this and retro that, and looking at the past as being better. And I still firmly believe that we have the power within us to make the future better, and we're getting there. It's a tug of war, but we're getting there.
Sorry, we digressed, didn't we?
We did.
Let's go. We're talking about. So John Taylor, how did you meet him, and where is that project sort of going?
So Duran Duran were playing a concert in Eastern Canada, and Canada's big. The nearest major center to us is like 8 hours away or 6 hours away, and John was playing like 20 hours away. And his tech Bernie called and said, "Hey, I'm from Duran Duran, and we're wondering if we could try out one of your basses." And so I said, "Are you kidding? Of course." When do you need it? Tomorrow. And so we put something together. It was a combustion, and we missed the cutoff for FedEx. And I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So I hopped in my car with the bass, and I broke every speed limit. This isn't broadcast in Canada, is it?
Definitely not, no.
Okay, good. Broke every speed limit on my way to the FedEx office. And I get there at like 1 minute to 5, and I squeeze through the doors, and I'm going, man, I hope there's a miracle. And I hear my name, "Hey, Sheldon," and it's the FedEx rep. And it's like, dude, I need a favor. I'll never ask this again, but this is for John Taylor. It has to be in Ontario by tomorrow. Is there anything you can do? He says, "Yeah, I'll drive it up to the airport. No problem, man."
Amazing.
He did, and we got it into John's hands, and.
What year? How long ago is this? Because I think you mentioned the relationship goes back a while.
It goes back at least 4 years.
Right.
And so we never asked anything of him. I was just happy to have a bass in his hands. And so gradually he tried that bass, and then he tried recording with it and went, wow, this works really well. And the more he used it, the more he liked it. And we sent out other basses for him to try, and some he liked, some he didn't like. But he really gravitated towards the NG and the combustion, and so it became time to. I always thought, wouldn't it be cool to do a John Taylor model? And always wanted to work with him in that regard. But they're music royalty. You just don't walk up and say, "All right, hey, why don't let's do lunch?"
And he's a style icon as well. So
very much so.
I can imagine you probably getting the basic bones of the instrument right, and then having to do 100 revisions to get the visual element of it right.
Yeah, fortunately, he's got a really talented team. There's a woman named Patty that works with him, and she's a great stylist, amazing woman. So this year, it came up that John would like to work on a John Taylor model. Now, the first album, Rio, which has some of the most iconic bass lines ever, he was like 17 when he recorded that stuff.
Mad.
The first album, Rio, came out, and it was recorded on a Neve console.
Yeah.
And Neve's just this great British brand. The Beatles records were recorded on Neve. Queen Elizabeth had a Neve PA system. There's just a ton of history. So yeah, so Rupert Neve, he's no longer with us, but the Neve company is still alive and well. And way back in the 90s, it was a thing in Nashville to take a Neve console, pull one of the strips out, and turn it into a rack mount unit for your bass, because there was just this magic quality that Neve brought to the tone. And I always thought, wouldn't it be cool to work with them? And so we talked about that, and we've been talking about it for a few years. So it's been quite a few years that I've had this dream of working with Neve, and Nick Wells, our artist relations, reached out to them, and turns out that the entire engineering team are bass players. And they've only, if I recall correctly, they've only worked with one other guitar company, not a bass company, but a guitar company. And so this was kind of like a fun project for them. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could get a John Taylor model with a custom Neve preamp, and the tie-in with the Rio album and the history of Neve. And so that's what we've done. And so they worked on a circuit for us, and it's a beautifully musical sounding circuit. It's not one of those circuits where you plug it in and go, wow, that's a lot of EQ. No, it's subtle. You can almost turn the dials to anything you want, and it still sounds musical.
Could we, I mean, we're not going to put this video out until this is all in the public domain, so maybe now would be a good time to see on screen a picture of the bass. Presumably you'll be able to supply us with a picture of the bass.
We'll be able to supply one, yeah.
Awesome. I love the idea of working with Neve to do something internal on the bass. I mean, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Oh man, they did such a great job.
Oh man. Well, look, I'm excited about that. Like you say, I mean, that is next level, music royalty there. So, well, look, I mean, to conclude then, what does the next 4 or 5 years at Dingwall look like? Are there other products that you're thinking of doing? I suppose one of the, I almost feel it's a I don't want this question to feel somehow derogatory almost to bass players, but is there a sense that you've made a conscious decision not to go into the guitar market? It is ultimately a bigger market, so must be sort of commercially attractive to look at that. Do you see yourself staying firmly as a bass manufacturer, or is it still at the back of your mind that maybe guitars might be a thing again one day?
They will be a thing again. Now the question is, will people accept a guitar with a Dingwall badge on it? Even though I'm a guitar player, dyed in the wool, and passionate about guitars, the question is, will people go, yeah, but what do you know about guitar? So there's the potential of that, and there are ways around that. We have talented guitar players, guitar builders on our team that have their own designs, and so that might be one option.
I think you obviously, your brain works in a certain way. I like it. I like meeting people who see I think if you look at the greatest pioneer of musical instruments, or certainly of contemporary musical instruments of all time, being Leo Fender, he just had a knack of listening to the challenges musicians had. He had a phenomenal understanding of manufacturing and engineering, and he was able to take all of that and produce the arguably the greatest set of the greatest catalogue of electric musical instruments of all time. Amps, pickups, guitars, basses, and I sort of feel like you come from you're not going, I'm the player, I'm building instruments for me. You're coming from I'm a designer who's listening to challenges, understanding technology, acoustics, how different people can bring different things to the party, and you're sort of putting that all together and creating products. So I don't see why guitar players would not resonate with that in the sense of, I do know what you mean though, and I do know what you mean. There are lots of examples of brands that have become famous doing one thing, and then they make a perfectly good something else, but the market just goes, whoa, you can't put that name on that kind of product. So I understand your concern there, but I wouldn't. I certainly, I don't have any sort of concerns around going, yeah, I don't think that would work. So
yeah, and there's the 7 and 8 string market. Those guys they're like a hybrid between bass players and guitar players. So that would be a good place for us to start. Mm-hmm. And we do have designs that are being worked on currently that would be kind of a cool 7 or 8 string. They'd be a cool 6 string as well. One of the other problems I need to solve is that on basses like this, we have 2 years worth of customers waiting. So we're solving that problem. We've increased our production to 1 a day about 6 months ago, and now it's at 1.5 a day. And our goal is 3 a day, and we'll be able to get that waiting time down to 9 months. And if we can wait 9 months for a baby, you can wait 9 months for a guitar.
I love that. I absolutely, there's such a, what's the right, I don't think people realize now, they'll see a brand like Dingwall and they'll see famous bass players use it, and they'll see guitars hanging up in shops, basses hanging up in shops and stuff. And they'll have no idea that this is still a 1 bass a day operation. It's so custom. You end up going, that means in an entire year, only 300 odd people are going to get to own one of these basses, which is mad. I guess combustion is at a different production level, but you're talking about at the Canadian level. It's just mad.
Yeah, the combustions would be more than 10 times that, but still, even 10 times that it's a big world out there.
10 a day is not much.
That's tiny. Yeah.
I certainly know if you compare that to the big G's and the big F's and all that kind of stuff, you're talking, if you added up everything they made right around the world, you're talking thousands and thousands a day. It's just
pretty much, they do our yearly output by coffee every morning.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's crazy, isn't it? And I'm fair play, because I guess it just adds to the desirability of it all, doesn't it? You are going to be in a fairly select club, aren't you? If you've got a Canadian-made Dingwall bass around your neck, or even a Far Eastern-made one, you're in a pretty select club.
And there's an emotion that comes with that. I mean, there's a feeling that you get knowing that you're kind of in on something that nobody else gets, right? Nobody else is aware of yet. And we've always been kind of a cult brand where our customers are kind of evangelical, almost to the point where they turn other people off. They're like those weird Dingwall guys. They're way too into their instruments. But it's a cool club, and they all get along, and they're supportive. For the longest time, because every bass that we build gets sold to an end user, if you wanted to try one, it'd be very difficult. Yeah. You could always come down to here, to Anderton's, and they'd have one in the wall. But if you were in the sticks someplace, you could go online and you could say, any Dingwall players in, let's say, I don't know, Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. And chances are somebody would say, yeah, I'm here. You want to try my bass? Come on over. So they would accept complete strangers to come in and try their basses. And there's just this brotherhood of our customers. And I love that.
That's brilliant.
Every single one of our customers, I would gladly have a beer with and hang out with.
That's great. Look, we could probably talk for hours, but I know that the time is ticking and we need to wind up. But so I'm just going to say thank you so much again for stopping by. It's a pleasure to be, again, a part of this select group of people that gets to sell Dingwall basses. Thanks so much for coming over.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll catch up with you next year if we're all at the NAMM show again, or you're back over here. But yeah, as I said, it's a pleasure. I've learned a lot just listening to you talk for the last hour or so. Hopefully the guys have learned something too. And yeah, please do come and check a Dingwall bass out when you are next passing a Dingwall stockist, or find one of these evangelical Dingwall players that will invite you into their house to have a coffee and try their guitar. So there we go. Thank you so much, Sheldon. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Lee.
Cheers. Take care.